All right, hello everyone. It is the start of week 4 here, Wednesday, August 23rd, and we have a couple of new projects to listen to. So you have just finished out your week 3 assignments, which includes your Angry Bots composition, and I have a couple of those lined up here. There we go. So we will start out our session this Wednesday, like we have on our previous Wednesday classes, with a discussion of the three assignments. Actually, let me put names on here. That's one part that I have not done yet, so we know whose is whose. Although, if you've stared at this long enough, you might even recognize your waveforms. There we go. Should make it a little more obvious. Let's do this. There we go. All right, so we are going to listen to these one at a time. Oh, you don't see my screen. Let's start there. That should work. So we will start out with a discussion of these submissions, and then we'll get into the new assignments for week 4. So our main focus here in the last week is to discuss how you might take the knowledge that you've gained and the projects that you've worked on and apply them outside of the class. Apply them. Certainly, hopefully you've been gathering portfolio material as you've been progressing through each one of your classes and maybe working on external projects. And you, by the end of the month, will have 2 video captures and 2 fully working games with your music and sound effects in them. And hopefully you've taken the opportunity to test out your music for Angry Bots in the game so far. And so in the last week, we will talk about how you find projects to work on, how do you gather other free resources and materials to create more material for your demo reel or portfolio, because there's a lot of other games out there that are freely available that you can tear apart and get access to the music and sound effects and add your own. We will talk about how do you find clients and how do you find jobs and projects, talk about different online resources to kind of get involved with the industry, communicate with folks that are in the industry, do research on companies, and just basically get your foot in the door and how do you move on beyond the class, because one of the big purposes of the class is to introduce you to this side of the industry, to show you that your music is just as viable in a game as it is in any other format, and to give you exposure to this type of work to see if it's something that appeals to you, and if there's an opportunity to work on a game project, or you'll find an opportunity to work on a game project, what does it entail, and what type of work is it? And so we will provide resources and talk about a lot of those things. That'll come up more in Friday's discussion, and but that's what your last round of assignments kind of is focused towards overall, building your portfolio and finding other resources beyond the class. All right, so let's start out with our peer review. Let's start out with our discussion of these Angry Bots submissions. I will start out with an overview of all of them, and then we'll go listen to them one by one. So the main focus of Angry Bots, or at least the music and the composition, is we're focused on the change and the difference between ambient and action. For a large portion of the gameplay, your character is going to be walking around or navigating through the game world. and they won't be engaged with any enemies or bad guys. So there will be a period of time where they will hear a piece of music that represents this ambient game state. And we are focused on the difference in intensity and energy between a lower intensity ambient game state and the other set of cues, which are your action cues. So in the game, you are attacked by a couple of different robots that are defending this robot laboratory that you are trying to make your way through. And each one of those robots has its own action theme, a piece of music that plays only when you are battling or engaged with that enemy. And the music and your choice of instrumentation should represent that particular robot or that battle, so that a player would be able to recognize that piece of music and be able to identify that robot, even if it's off the screen and they haven't seen it yet. So they know what's coming. So we have an ambient cue. So looking at my logic session here, let's see, get it to square up there. We have this column here. Of course, each student has their own track with their submission, their WAV files. We have this first column here. These are all of the ambient loops. These files over here, these are the 3 action cues. And these little files over here, these are 3 stingers. So each group, or each student, has their own set of files, and kind of hopefully organize this in a way that's easily identifiable. So starting over here on the ambient cue, the parameters of the file it is to be somewhere between 1 minute and 2 minutes long. It's going to be heard most often or most consistently during gameplay. For one reason is that if your player just sits there or stands there and does nothing else, they will be hearing this ambient cue. So if they just go hide in a corner somewhere, they will end up hearing this file looping around over and over again. The ambient cue doesn't necessarily mean the genre of ambient music, nor does it mean it is a sound effect like an ambience, like wind or room tone. It can have rhythm, it can have energy to it, it can have percussion, it can have a strong bass line, or it doesn't have to either. But it doesn't, it needs to have development and change. It should not be just one pad or drone that sits there and does the same thing over and over again. There should be different layers that weave their way in and out of the mix to create change over the course of the loop. And then once it reaches the end of the file, it's going to return back to the top and make musical, logical sense, both rhythmically, harmonically, the choice of the instrumentation. Since you do have a more than a minute's worth of time to develop, oftentimes we hear that the end of a particular cue has wandered off somewhere so far that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense when it returns back to the front. So we have to always check out the loops. Okay, so ambient just means less than action. So we really have to understand the amount of energy in the ambient cue in terms of the action cue. So sometimes we hear so much instrumentation, so much percussion, so many elements in the ambient cue that there isn't much room to go up into the action cues. But that's one of the main things that we are listening for, is the intensity difference between the ambient and action cues. So your action cues are to be 8 bars long. So these here in the middle look to be quite a bit longer overall, but we'll listen to those and check those out. But they are 8-bar cues, so whenever the robots come out to attack, The battles happen pretty quickly, so an 8-bar loop typically covers the amount of time that you will hear that particular cue. So maybe even if it loops over one or two times, it still will pretty consistently work. You don't need a lot of time to develop overall. And the other reason is that it will always play from the top. So if the battles are pretty short, you may not actually make it into the later parts of a action queue. So all of these files look like they are strong in volume and power. They all look like they are mixed at a strong level. These three files, this middle action queue, the mech action queue, concerns me a little bit just in volume because of the power between your buzzer and your spider queue. The mech queue actually represents the biggest robot also. So just reading the waveforms, I would consider that the mech should at least compete with the buzzer or the spider, if not be a bit louder. Or not even louder in volume, but just more intense overall. And scrolling over here to the stingers. Stingers are meant to be sharp impacts that hit with a strong attack at the beginning of the file and fade out to silence quickly and all the way to silence, specifically to silence. So you want to make sure that they don't get cut off at the end of the file. There's typically a couple of elements or layers to a stinger, a strong hit or impact or low end thump or bass drop or some sort of power and strength element to the sound. And then there's often a sort of modulation element, a layer on top that represents whether it's a synth element or whether it is a cool filter or delay or a whole bunch of reverb. But there's typically two or more layers to an impact that you shouldn't have anything that's just low end because that can get lost in the power of the action cues or at least muddy up the low end. Or it can't just be high end. The high end elements do cut through. That's always very good. But the strength and the power and attack of the low end or the impact will cause a good change in attention or attract attention away from the change between ambient and action. So you definitely want to kind of smack the player across the face with that impact to say, hey, look over here. I'm changing the music real quick. Pay attention to this thing. It's going to fade out pretty quickly, fade out to silence, and then leave room for the rest of the action. So hopefully you took the time to listen to your stingers against the action cues. These three up here, these look a little bit longer. You want to typically watch out for musical phrases or percussion riffs or anything that has rhythm or pitch to it that may clash with the action cues, since you're not ever really sure when that's going to happen. And you want to make sure it goes all the way to silence so it just doesn't get cut off at the end. These files down here have more of the correct shape overall with a strong hit at the beginning, fade out to silence. You have to watch out. These don't really look all that bad, but sometimes we'll see sounds that fade in on the stingers. The stingers hit exactly when that action comes in. So if you have anything that fades in over, a short fade in, you can sometimes get away with it, but anything that fades over a half second or a second or more typically will cause issues rhythmically, or your big reveal happens off the beat. So I guess I don't want to do that. So that's what we are listening for in each one of the cues. Those are things to pay attention to. Let's start into the first one here. That should be good. All right, let's see how it goes. That didn't work at all. Let's go over here, and we'll turn it up. Right, so there's some cool changes through there. All right, so the first thing that I hear, it certainly sounds appropriate for the game, with the synths and the drums, and there's some good energy through there. I think it is around the midway point on, except for right before the end. There's a pretty decent groove through this section right here, because the percussion and everything gets a little bit more stable. The percussion is the part that stands out to me the most. It sounds kind of far off and distant. There sounds like there's a phaser on it, and the rhythm needs to be more consistent, and well, I like the changes, but feels like some parts the rhythm kind of falls off. So bring the percussion forward in the mix. It sounds very distant. That'll bring up some of the impact to everything, and will create some good changes and variation. I like this synth, or it hits the synth note over here. Whatever that low end element is. So the snare kind of goes off at times, so I would work on more consistent rhythms through the cues. The rest of the synths work pretty well in creating a good atmosphere for the cue. You just have to kind of watch out all of the phasers and the big reverbs and delays work well on synths and pads, but it kind of causes a bit of confusion with the drums. All right, so let's see how that works against the action cues. We'll start with the buzzer action. Actually, no, I'll just listen to all three of them. One of the first things I hear is I would like to hear a bit more different instrumentation from one cue to the next. It feels each one of these action cues, the instrumentation feels really closely related to the ambient cue. So having variation between buzzer, mech, and spider creates more of that difference. Where last week, or the beginning of the month, when we were talking about 2D platformer, I talked about how The instrumentation should stay the same across all of the cues, and then but with this one you can have more variation in the instrumentation from one cue to the next. That creates more of a unique voice, more of a unique sound per robot. I think the Spider is the best out of the three of them, again, because it centers around a strong rhythm, especially in the first kind of bar or two. You have this kind of tom roll that goes around, but then the snare gets really wild through the second half of the Spider, and kind of glosses over that. And the repeating melodic line works to kind of create more definition through there. Overall, everything feels really overcompressed. I think that you might have more stuff going on, especially in this mech cue. The drums seem almost absent. I think you probably have a lot more going on in there that kind of gets lost in a lot of big reverbs and effects, and then maybe a compressor and limiter thrown on top of all of that. So watch out, especially using lots of compression or limiting on the master, so that you can affect things individually, but typically the more you get towards groups and masters, that you're lightening up on compression. Especially if you're chaining them together. Let's jump over here. And try 3 stingers. Whoa, that was not a stinger. Let's do that again. Yeah, so musical phrases like that, and synth notes will clash against the action cues, because first off, you don't know when they're going to play, and you're never really guaranteed in the game that they are going to be played sample accurately, so that rhythms and notes and changes might be slightly off. I mean, they're probably going to be pretty close, but it's typically why I will recommend against phrases, because of how they might clash against each other. And then these are playing randomly against either the mech or the Spider or the buzzer, and so you have to make sure they work across all of them. So if you have more of a generic hit, they typically become easier to play, to kind of work with anything. All right, so good stuff to work with. A couple of tweaks to be made to each groups of cues, but good stuff. Let's jump down here to the next one. And we'll hit play. Excellent. So it loops very nicely. Yeah, there's not too much to complain about with that one. You have good instrumentation. The production and the progression through the cue works well. Do you have any challenges overall making it work, or getting the ideas to mesh together, or maybe having it when it works plays back in the game? Yeah, the instrumentation, I think that obviously has drums and rhythm and bass line and a melodic part, but it's pretty consistent in its energy all the way through to leave room for the action cues. Intending that these action cues are much bigger and stronger than that. Here in the chat, just had to make a choice on ending it. I ended it pretty much how it started. Yeah, that's basically looking at the wave file here. It kind of feels like it goes up here and kind of plateaus, well, more like over here plateaus, and then comes back down so that it can connect very nicely back to the front. So the assignment requires that these are 8 bars long, but let's see what they are. Well, they fit the bill for action, that's for sure. Cool. Awesome. All right. Very good. Let's see where you go here. Nice. All right. I'm just going to let those roll in the background. I'll just start over here, do these two as I talk. So, first off, sounds awesome. Great guitar work. Drums work very nice, very well against the guitars. Great. Yeah, production level and quality and all that stuff. So, musically, it works out very well, fits the bill. I thought it seemed excessive at the time. Now I see why. Yeah. Well, so what I would do with this in a game situation is you would chop out all of those phrases and use them randomly to play back during gameplay. And it's unfortunate that it's not set up that way, but currently in the game, but with tools like Wise and Fmod, you can chop this up into the 8 phrases that you have and just have them randomly fire off. Are those a couple of takes, or they all comp together? Makes me want to play this game and shoot some robots, certainly. If you haven't checked out the Doom soundtrack for the new Doom 2016 game by Mick Gordon, it's got a lot of very good stuff. Kind of in the same vibe. And props to you for coming up with 8 different riffs and grooves all the way through, even if it was excessive, but it works out. Going for the Devil May Cry type vibe. Excellent. Great game. All right. So, I have no complaints there. The only thing a couple of things that I can identify from the game side of things is the fact that the battles are so short. It's probably only going to get through 1 or 2 of those phrases before the battle is over, unless you just have the robot chase you around in the demos, which could very well be. And then the other side of it would be to identify more instrumentation in each cue that is unique. The grooves are certainly unique, but it's an extra level of learning the player has to do. The player has to learn the grooves, not just the sound of the particular music in the cue or the sound of the instrumentation. So it's kind of, I don't know if it's changing the tone of the guitar or switching up different ideas or different instrumentation, but those would be the challenges from the gameplay side of things, because I have a sense that when playing it in the game, it doesn't matter which robot it's coming after you, it just sounds awesome all the time. It's just like awesome action music playing, but figuring out which one's which when it's not you, the composer, playing it would maybe be a little bit more difficult for the player. But that is way more like subjective and a discussion to be had with a client, where you've obviously hit the mark on the overall design and the appropriateness for the game and production level and all that sort of stuff. So it's finding the specifics to how it actually works in the game, because in the DAW it sounds great, and so does that transition over to the game. Let's see, just want to make sure I read all of this stuff off. Just had to make a choice on it in the ending. I ended up pretty much how it started. I definitely missed it bar for phrase. I thought it seemed excessive at the time. Now I see why. Yes, it's all comped. Yes, there is comping. I was going for a Devil May Cry type vibe, and I think synth layers unique to each loop might help identify different bots. Yes, and it might just be one characteristic instrument per cue, that it's just to subconsciously trigger the player to know what's coming. So it doesn't necessarily have to be much, and it doesn't have to be completely different from one to the next, because it's sounding very good right as it is. So listening to those cues makes me kind of worried for the stingers, because these are all big and great sounding, so we got to make sure that these cut through. So let's see what these are. Yeah, okay. So definitely would not use the orchestra hit, the 90s orchestra hit here. This probably would get lost. This almost sounds like some China cymbal or crash cymbal in the kit played against the drums in the rest of the action cue. And this one, the fade, this probably doesn't have as much hit and impact in it to really cut through. So, I would definitely work on the stingers, making them just as strong and badass sounding as the action cues are. and just make sure that they, when played against the rest of the music, that they will be identifiable. All right. Great stuff there. Great stuff to listen to. The first two cut pretty well in the demo. Cool. Yeah, so I think frequency content-wise, they work out. But like vibe and appropriateness might be a different story. All right. Cool stuff. Let's try the third one here. Oh, and also I saw your message on the looping of the files and the previous version, and the fact that you caught how they looped or how they didn't loop or whatever. So props to you for getting that all figured out. Can you give me a quick description of what was happening? You said it was something with latency, and it's probably with the bounce. If it's all live recorded instrumentation, maybe there's like internal latency in it. Kind of throws everything off. Okay, so let's try this ambient cue. First thing that concerns me is how it builds up, and it builds up like a traditional song structure, where every 2 or 4 bars it adds in a new idea. We got a change here. So, and especially the waveforms being lower over here versus it sounds like you may have more instrumentation, or at least different instrumentation over here. So we'll see how it loops back around. I think the drums and just the whole progression feels a little too much like a pop song arrangement. So, yeah, I would work the shape of the instrumentation. I would either keep the drums and everything going through the front, like don't build it up and add instrument by instrument, or if you add instrument layers in, then you'd have to take them out one at a time before it loops, so that the end of this file makes sense or is the same as the beginning of the same file. So basically anything that's added in over time has to be subtracted before it loops. All right. Whoops. Jump over here. Go for 3 action cues. All right, so the The buzzer is the best out of the three. It's got just a much more kind of dangerous groove, even than the ambient cue and the mech and the spider. The mech sounds way too happy, way too major. Feels like the mech's kind of bopping around. It's not very intimidating overall. And then the spider also feels like it has more of that kind of poppy progression to it. Bum, bum. So, and this with the has a stronger groove to it, has the eighth note bass. I mean, you can just. No, I guess there's some good movement. I mean, even the bass gets a little too major overall. So, but work kind of from this point to create more intensity and more danger to the music, more action to the music overall. From the ambient into those action cues. And we'll go to these. 3 stingers. So these work well for the music that is currently there, but they have that major chord. They hit the tonic, and this one's a little. It's got a little strength to it, but it almost feels like a ending. Da 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 da. All of these feel like you just won overall. So yeah, I mean, yes, they then work very well against these major cues. So I would maybe go for a minor tonality in all of this. But yeah, so functionally, I think it's working. The loop of the ambient cue could be a little bit tighter. The energy of the action cues works well, but you could then turn up the danger and intensity. And then whatever you do in the action cues should also kind of be reflected over in those ambient cues. I'm sorry, in those stinger cues. So, lots to talk about in this composition. There's certainly a reason why this composition is second in the month, as you may have kind of encountered. There's a bit more challenge to it overall. There is a little bit more of a puzzle in how the music is going to switch and transition at a moment's notice back and forth. So maintaining the same key, some form of the tempo, either half-time or double time, or and maybe maintaining some element of the instrumentation can help the transitions back and forth. The stingers will kind of hopefully gloss over that transition, and it takes about 3 seconds for the music from the action cue, or when the action cue is over, or let's say this, when the battle is over, it takes about 3 seconds for the action cue to transition back to the ambient. When the battle is over, it always returns back to the beginning of the ambient cue. So that is something to consider. You may not want to make the beginning of your ambient cue too memorable or obvious, as it will come back in the same way that same time. So having a drum fill or a cymbal crash or some really identifiable synth note or hit or something may create a really obvious signpost to say, hey, here we go again. It's going to transition back in the same way. So hopefully you found a lot of good things to consider in the composition. Now we are going to switch over to the discussion of the new week 4 assignments. Please let me know if you have any questions. Also, it is the end of the month, or quickly approaching overall, so please reach out if you have any questions about the assignments or the class, or how to get anything finished and wrapped up for the month. We want to make sure we can address that early on in this week, so we can get everything fixed and ready so that you can transition into your next class easily for the next month. So let me know if you have any questions. Other than that, we'll see you again on Thursday. On Friday. Thanks. I am going to do an overview of the new assignments that are coming up for week 4, which should feel quite comfortable because you've basically done a very similar process for your 2D platformer composition. So we'll just have to apply this more specifically to Angry Bots. So hopefully you've had the opportunity to go and download the projects or the assignments for week 4. And we'll start out with the other half of our Angry Bots project. Now that you have finished out the composition, we move into the sound design for this week. And it is very entertaining sound design, lots of fun stuff in there. It's all weapons and robots and explosions and lasers and missiles, all sorts of fun, kind of interesting sound design for this game. So the approach to doing the sound design is very similar for Angry Bots as it was for 2D platformer. There's less kind of silly sounds and fun sounds that you can just do with the microphone. It's a lot more designed overall, but still got some good stuff to look forward to. So for this, we're going to set it up in much the same way that you did for 2D platformer. I would suggest that you create a brand new session in Logic or your favorite DAW, and you are going to import all of the original sounds from the game. I'm going to create one new track here. And hold on just a moment. Let me go get a copy of the game. There we go. Let's do this. All right. Here is a copy of Angry Bots. And you've already navigated to find all of the sounds and put your own music into the game. But we'll do it like this. We'll go to Show Package Contents. And we'll get a folder called Contents. And we are going to Data. We're going to Streaming Assets. And we're going to Sound Effects. Yeah, I'll just pull these. I think I backed them up at some point. So here are all of the original sound effects. And if I go into, let me do this. Pull this over here. Oops. Move this out of the way. Bring Logic back up. No? Come on, Logic. There you are. I'm going to take all of those sounds that I just found, and I'm going to pull them into a Logic session right here. and drop them on a track, and I'm going to tell Logic to put them all on one track. Place all files on one track. And then you would probably spend some time separating all of these out. Make your life a whole lot easier as you organize it. But then you would create a couple of tracks directly below. New tracks. And you would build on these tracks. So, like I mentioned before, you would kind of separate these out. Hello. No selection. There we go. Come on, Logic, cooperate with me. There we go. Just make some space in between each one of them so that you have some clear space to build everything and work with the session. I'm just going to switch over here and play the sounds. These are all of the sounds that you will create. There are a whole lot of explosions and doors in this game. So I would, you have access to the Westar library. You also have access to freesound.org. Those are good resources for sound effects, source sound effects to work on this project. And I would suggest that you go find a large group of sounds and bring them in and edit them all in one shot, as opposed to going one at a time. So I would go find, you know that you have quite a few explosion sounds. Flying buzzer, destroyed explosion, patrol mech, destroyed explosion, missile explosion. Figure out all of the certain types of explosion types of sounds that you need. Then go into the search engine and find the particular types of sound effects that you can use. A whole group of them, bring them back into Logic and edit them all down and create different versions for the different explosions that you might need. As opposed to saying, okay, we need an explosion, one sound, going out, finding the sound, bringing it back in, editing it, naming and bouncing it, then saying, oh, I need another explosion. Go back, find another explosion sound, bring it back in. It'll probably save you a couple of trips overall. Westar has been acting up, I guess, because of the traffic. Every once in a while, we run into a message that says maximum number of downloads has been exceeded or something like that. And it is typically reset after a couple of days, something to that effect. So if you are getting issues with Westar, there also is a new login and password that you can find. I think it was set up already when you did the looping assignment, but if not, it's in that, the new password is in that assignment or it's on FSO. So anyway, you go out and you find your sounds. Let's go ahead and listen to all of these sounds and give a couple of suggestions on your overall approach to this. Let me make sure that everybody will be able to hear these and they won't be too loud, hopefully. Hold on. Let me check my levels. Okay. All right, no problem, Michael. Thank you. Oh, I guess not there. All right, let's see. Let's try that. Let's try this. All right. So this is called airlock door close and then airlock door open. All right, that looks like it's working. So, airlock door open and close. A lot of times you can get away with the close being the reverse of the open, or at least starting with that. Often you need like a ka-chunk at the end as the door actually like closes and maybe locks. But it's a good way of taking a sound and reversing it to be able to get either the open or close that you need, because it always is often a rising pitch to go up and a downward pitch to go down. The next one here, then we have exterior rain and interior hum. Right, these are pretty long samples. Rain, just go out and find a rain loop. Interior hum is often you can look for room tone. That's a very common search term, or air conditioning, or find like an empty office or something like that. So those are longer loops. They need to be able to loop because your player could just be sitting there forever. And they're longer here, but they don't necessarily need to be, your version need to be that long. Flying buzzer destroyed explosion. Here's our first explosion. That is when you destroy the buzzer. Zap electric is when it zaps you. You hear that right at the beginning of the game. Then we have a couple of sounds for the patrol mech. This is the big RoboCop looking robot as it comes after you. This is the alert when it first notices you. Destroyed explosion. This is at least this sound is a massively huge explosion. It kind of works for the big robot. I do think it's a bit of overkill overall, but this is the destroyed explosion. Does have a cool little bit of clipping in there that works for the explosion. Patrol mech footstep 1 and 2. I think they cheat a little bit and they just put the same sound as for 1 and 2. You should probably have a little bit of difference between 1 and 2 so that you can hear like basic. It refers to like left foot, right foot as it goes back and forth. So maybe even just a little bit of pitch difference between the two will give you that variation. Missile explosion. This is when the big patrol mech shoots at you. No, that is sorry. When it sorry, that was missile explosions when it hits a wall. Shoot missiles when it actually shoots it. So those are quite large missile sounds for the patrol mech attack. Enemy spider. This is the alert sound when it wakes up. Then we have, let's kind of move this out of the way, destroyed explosion. That is when you destroy the enemy robot, the enemy spider. This is spider proximity. This is one very short beep. As the spider gets closer and closer to you, it beeps. The beep gets faster and faster. So by proximity, the closer you are, the faster it beeps. The game does all of that for you. You just have to provide one very short beep. If it's too long and it goes it beeps really fast in the game, then it stacks up and doesn't sound. It doesn't work too well. Enemy spider self-destruct when it's a bomb on legs. When it goes off, it has this sound. I think this is a pretty horrible explosion. It's not a very good sound for being an explosion, especially compared to the other explosions in the game. Interior door open and close. This is the close. This is the open. All of the doors in the game are all like futuristic Star Trek doors where they just walk up to them, they move automatically. So it's not. Sometimes I hear like somebody grabs doorknob and wooden door opens and closes. That's not what these doors are. These are like some sort of motorized version of that. It needs to like sliding doors. You can try servos and pneumatics, hydraulics, that kind of stuff, where you get a sort of motorized movement sound. Locked. The next one here is called locked door opening. Maybe. When you hack the computers and you can enter the doors, they automatically open for you at that point. That's just a tone for that. This is when the player gets hit. This is the player shooting the weapon. Now, something to point out with that weapon, and I'm going to look at the waveform over here. This is the player shooting. All right, so is this going to work here? Hello, fader. Okay, so that is the gunshot in the game. There are 12 shots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There are 12 bullet shots in this wave file. And your shot, it doesn't have to be a bullet. It could be a laser. It could be a whatever kind of weapon you want it to be. But you should follow that waveform, because I think it's timed to the animation of the muzzle flash in the game. There's a little bit of a light effect that kind of flashes on and off, and you should be able to time the two together. So pay attention to how that sound is set up. The last one here is called terminal hacked. This is when you stand next to the computer in the game. It, again, quote unquote, hacks it. And here, it's a very computery electronic sound. I've heard people do like a voice prompt. They can have it be a robotic voice, even almost like Siri or something like that. It just says, terminal hacked. Or I've had people sound like typing on a keyboard, or again, more kind of computery electronic tone like that. Whatever you find that works the best. So all of these sounds are 16-bit 441K stereo files. You should, again, build all of your tracks and sounds in a single session on multiple tracks. Lay out all of the different wave files across the original ones across a track here. Of course, when you bounce, you will have this muted. These original sounds will never end up in your actual custom sound effects, but they're just there as a guide when you're building everything. So hopefully that gives you some good direction there for your sound design. Like I said, a total of 22 sound effects. Most of it is doors and explosions and kind of weapon or robot sounds. So kind of find them in groups. Then you have the composition description. You've already done this. It's very similar from 2D platformer. Basically gives you the means to submit everything for your from your composition. The submitting your video, submitting your information about the composition itself. So make sure you have a good amount of time to finish that out after you've completed your composition. And then the final game captures. You will be capturing a video from Angry Bots, and you will also post up your 2D platformer submissions. So for those that participated in the peer review and feedback, everybody had an opportunity to check out your submissions because you posted them up there, posted up your YouTube links. But we haven't been able to see everybody's. You haven't been able to see everybody's final work. So once you have completed Angry Bots, you will also take your YouTube link from the 2D platformer composition, post them up there. Please double and triple check that all of your links are public, so that not only everybody else can check it out, but we can also check it out for grading. Then post up and make comments and constructive criticism and critiques and discussion, and give a thumbs up and a good job to everybody for the month. And yeah, it just gives everybody the opportunity to check out everybody else's work. So again, you've already done a pass at a composition description. You've already done a game capture with 2D platformer. So you've worked on those types of projects. It's just getting all of the final material together for Angry Bots and putting it into some form that you can show off the work that you have done. So that's everything that we needed to discuss for week 4. Again, please ask any questions that you might have. Message us with any questions or issues or anything from the projects or grades or anything that you need to discuss as we wrap up the month. A good question here in the chat. So do we upload the original videos for 2D platformer? You should upload the best videos that you have for 2D platformer. And I hope that you take any feedback and make updates and changes. And if you have done anything to 2D platformer, create another video for it. But if the original one is the only one that you have, and that's the one that you want to show off, then you can post that one up certainly as well. So, but yeah, it should be the real purpose of the YouTube videos and is making sure that everybody has a good portfolio video to add to the collection to be able to show off the work that you've done. So whatever version that is, excuse me, whatever version that is, and the best thing to show off, please submit that. So, all right, let's go ahead and wrap it up here. And we'll meet again on Thursday. Please come equipped with any questions that you might have. But again, we had a great amount of good discussion, good feedback to go over. So thanks for everybody that submitted for peer review. And yeah, we'll meet one more time on Thursday. Thanks a lot and have a good evening.